Two worlds, one city. Bound by hope and defined by resilience.
Grace arrived at the Danladi mansion on a Tuesday in August, the rain pouring so hard that by the time she reached the gate, her wrapper was soaked through and her slippers had lost their color to mud. She was 17 years old, carrying a black nylon bag with two dresses, a wrapper, a comb, and a photograph of her late father folded inside a Bible. The gateman, a heavy-set man named Peter, looked her up and down before letting her in. "You be the new girl, way madam. Send message about." "Yes, sir," Grace said, water dripping from her braids. Better work well. Madam no day tolerate laziness." The compound alone was bigger than her entire village square, a 3-story duplex with white pillars, a swimming pool shaped like a kidney bean, 2 Mercedes and a Range Rover parked under a carport, and a garden with flowers she didn't know the names of. Grace had come from Naka, from a 2-room house with a zinc roof that groaned every time it rained, and she stood at the edge of the compound, feeling, for the first time in her life, the true size of what she didn't have. Mrs. Danladi, Chief Mrs. Patricia Danladi, interviewed her in the kitchen, seated on a stool, while Grace stood dripping on the tiled floor. "Your auntie tells me you're a hard worker," Mrs. Danladi said, not looking up from her phone. "Yes, ma. You will wake by 5 a.m. You will not gossip with the other girls. You will not touch anything in this house that does not belong to your work. And you will never, never raise your voice in my house. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma." "Good. Go and meet Auntie Comfort. She'll show you your quarters." That was the whole interview. Grace was given a small room behind the kitchen, shared with 2 other house helps, Blessing and Patience, both slightly older, both already worn thin by the rhythms of the house, up before the sun, asleep long after the family had gone to bed, forever moving, forever invisible. She met Michael 3 days later. He came down for breakfast in a singlet and jogging shorts, 24 years old, freshly returned from 4 years studying business in London, tall, light-skinned in the way Abuja society prized, with the easy confidence of a boy who had never once in his life been told no, and meant it. "New girl," he said, not really a question, looking at her the way you might look at a new piece of furniture that had been added to the parlor. "What's your name?" "Grace, sir." "Grace." He said it slowly, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "Fine name." She said nothing, kept her eyes on the tray of eggs she was carrying to the dining table, and hurried past him. Behind her, she heard him chuckle, not unkindly, just amused, the way a man laughs at something he's already decided he wants. It didn't happen all at once. That was the thing about it. If it had happened all at once, Grace might have had the sense to run. Instead, it came the way water finds a crack in a wall, slowly, patiently, until one day, the whole thing is soaked through, and you can't remember when it started. Michael began finding reasons to be in the kitchen. He would come down late at night, when the rest of the house was asleep, claiming hunger, and Grace, whose job it was to keep something ready for whoever wanted it, would warm up rice or make him indomie, and he would sit at the counter and talk to her while she worked. At first it was small talk, then it became something else. "You're always working," he said one night, watching her scrub a pot. "You never rest." "That's the job, sir." "Stop calling me sir. My name is Michael." "Yes, Michael." He smiled like he'd won something. He began bringing her things. A piece of suya, wrapped in newspaper, a bottle of Fanta from his own stash, a phone recharge card once, unprompted, just because. Small things. Things that, to a boy like Michael, cost nothing, and meant nothing, but to a girl who had never in her life been given anything without being asked to pay for it in some other way, felt enormous. "You're different from the girls I know," he told her one night in October, 2 months into his quiet campaign. "Those girls, all they know is Instagram and asking men for money. You, you have substance." Grace, who had never finished secondary school because her father died and there was no more money for it, who had spent 4 years of her life mothering her younger siblings while her own mother hawked pepper soup by the roadside, did not know what to do with a boy who called her substantial. She had spent her whole life being told, in 1,000 small ways, that she was less important, less worthy, less seen. And here was Michael Danladi, son of the house, telling her the opposite. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was only being kind because he was, after all, Olga's son, and it would be foolish to be rude to him. She told herself many things. By December, he had started coming to her room after the other girls were asleep. By January, she had stopped telling herself it meant nothing. "When I finish settling into the business," he told her one night, his voice low, his hand tracing the curve of her collarbone in the dark, "I'll get us a place. Not here, somewhere just for us. My parents will come around eventually. They always do." She believed him. God help her. She believed him completely. Grace missed her period in March. By the time she was certain, buying a test kit with money she'd hidden inside her Bible, sneaking to a chemist 3 bus stops away so no one from the house would see her, it was already 2 months. She told Michael on a Thursday evening in the boys' quarters storeroom where they sometimes met, her voice shaking, her hands pressed flat against her stomach as though she could protect what was inside from what was about to happen. The change in his face was immediate. "You're pregnant," he repeated, as if the word itself was diseased. "Yes. How? We were careful. Careful no day work all the time, Michael." She reached for his hand. "We go tell your parents. You promise me." He pulled his hand back, like she'd burned him. "Tell my parents what, exactly?" "That I got the house girl pregnant." He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only panic, dressed up as scorn. "Grace, be serious. My mother will kill me. My father is already planning my introduction to the Balogun family's daughter. You know this. Everybody knows this. You think I can just walk into that house and say, 'Ah, by the way, I have a child on the way with our maid. So wetting you one make I do.'" Her voice cracked. "Abort Michael, I no fit do that. I'm not saying abort it." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm saying handle it quietly. Maybe you go somewhere. Have the baby somewhere far. I'll send money. Nobody needs to know it's mine." "You want make I lie? Say na another man give me bell?" "I'm saying be reasonable." His voice rose. Then he caught himself, glancing toward the door, lowering it again. "You think this is easy for me too? Grace, please. Just give me time to think." He never gave her time. 2 days later, he told his mother himself, not out of courage, but because one of the other house helps, Patience, jealous and resentful for reasons of her own, had noticed Grace's morning sickness and reported it to Mrs. Danladi first, framing it as loyalty to the family. Grace was summoned to the parlor on a Sunday afternoon. Chief Mrs. Danladi sat on the leather sofa in her Sunday George wrapper, fresh from church, her Bible still in her lap, as though she'd carried the Word of God straight into the room to use as a weapon. "Sit down," she said. It was not kindness, it was command. Grace sat on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the floor. "Is it true? Ma? Don't ma me. Are you pregnant?" And is my son the father? Grace's mouth went dry. She looked up and saw Michael standing by the window, arms crossed, refusing to meet her eyes. Yes, ma, she whispered. The slap came before she even saw Mrs. Danlady's hand move. It cracked across her cheek so hard her ear rang, and for a moment the room tilted. You a showl. Mrs. Danlady's voice climbed, shaking. You come into my house. I feed you. I clothe you. I give you a roof. And this is how you repay me. You set a trap for my son. Ma, I did not. Shut up. Shut your dirty mouth. She turned to Michael. And you cannot even control yourself around house girls. Is this what I sent you to London for? Mummy, it wasn't like that. Michael started, but his mother waved him silent with a look that could curdle milk. She turned back to Grace, and her voice dropped into something colder, more calculating. Listen to me carefully. That child is not my son's. Do you understand me? You will take this money. She pulled a fold of naira notes from her purse and threw them onto the floor at Grace's feet, not into her hands, onto the floor, so she would have to bend down and gather them like a beggar. And you will go back to your village. You will tell your people the father is one of the local boys there. And if you ever try to come back here and claim my son fathered your bastard, I will make sure no house in Abuja ever employs you again. I will destroy your mother's name in that village. Do you hear me? Grace did not pick up the money. She looked at it lying scattered on the marble floor, then at Michael, who still would not look at her, and something inside her, some final, thin thread of hope she hadn't even realized she was still holding on to, snapped clean. Keep your money, she said quietly. What did you say? I said keep your money, ma. Grace stood, her legs shaking, but her voice, for the first time, did not. I go carry my bell and my shame, and I go leave your house. But I no go lie say na another man's pikin. This na Michael's child, and God they see everything we una do. Mrs. Danlady's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, Grace had already turned and walked out, past Peter at the gate, who watched her go with something like pity in his eyes, out into the Abuja evening, carrying nothing but her one nylon bag, and the child growing inside her. She went to her aunt's place first, a two-room flat in Nyanya, crowded already with 4 children, and stayed only long enough to gather herself before moving on to her mother's people near Lafia, where an old widowed grand-aunt took her in without asking too many questions. The pregnancy was hard. She sold pure water by the roadside in her 7th month, sun beating down on her swollen body, men jeering, women whispering. She gave birth in a government hospital in November, alone, screaming through 11 hours of labor, with no husband, no mother-in-law bringing pepper soup, no celebration, only a tired nurse who patted her hand and said, "Well done, go better." She named her daughter Faith. God is good. It was, perhaps, an act of defiance, as much as faith, a declaration that no matter what Michael Danladi and his mother believed about her, she would not let their cruelty define the terms of her child's existence. The years that followed were the kind of hard that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply accumulates, day by day, like sediment. She traded pepper and tomatoes at Karu Market. She learned to fry akara before dawn to sell to school children on their way to class. She moved into a single room with a shared bathroom, where NEPA took light for days at a stretch, and she studied by candlelight, not for herself, but so she could help Faith with her homework once the girl was old enough for school. She never asked the Danladis for anything. She never called. When Faith at 5 asked why she didn't have a daddy like the other children at her nursery school, Grace knelt down, held her daughter's small face in her hands, and said, Some children have daddies who day with them. You have a mummy who go always fight for you. That one better pass. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the truth Grace could afford to give. By the time Faith turned 7, Grace had saved enough, through years of trading and a small contribution from a cooperative society she'd joined with other market women, to move them into a slightly better room, one with its own bathroom, in a compound with other young families. She had also, quietly, without telling anyone, enrolled in adult literacy classes on Saturday afternoons, determined that whatever door had closed on her at 17 would not close on Faith too. She had built, brick by brick, out of nothing but stubbornness and a mother's love, something that was entirely hers. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in June, delivered by a young man on an Okada who asked 3 different neighbors before he found the right compound. It was addressed to Grace Williams, mother of Faith Okafor, and bore the letterhead of a law firm on Yakubu Gowon Crescent, Asokoro. Grace's hands trembled as she opened it, certain for one terrible moment that something had happened to her mother back in the village. It was nothing of the sort. Dear Madam, we write on behalf of the estate of the late Chief Edward Danladi, who passed away on the 3rd of May this year. In accordance with the requirements of probate under Nigerian law and the instructions of the family, we are conducting a search for all surviving children of the late chief's son, Mr. Michael Danladi, in order to properly settle the distribution of the estate. It has come to our attention through prior domestic staff records that you may be the mother of a child fathered by Mr. Michael Danladi. We kindly request that you contact this office at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter, including the possibility of a paternity test, as this affects the rightful inheritance due to your child. Grace read it twice, sitting on the edge of her bed, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Outside, she could hear Faith, 12 years old now, sharp-tongued, quick with numbers, dreaming of becoming a lawyer herself one day, laughing with the neighbors' children in the compound. 7 years of silence, and now, because a rich man had died and his estate needed tidying, they remembered her daughter existed. She thought of Mrs. Danladi's hand cracking across her face. She thought of the money thrown on the floor, like she was a dog to be paid off. She thought of Michael standing by that window, refusing to meet her eyes, while his mother called her an ashawo. She folded the letter carefully and put it under the mattress, and went outside to call Faith in for dinner. They did not wait long for a reply. Within 2 weeks, a black Lexus pulled up outside Grace's compound, drawing the attention of every child and gossiping auntie in the vicinity. Michael stepped out first, 31 now, heavier, more tired around the eyes, wearing a suit that cost more than Grace made in 3 months. Behind him came a woman Grace didn't recognize, and then, last, moving slower than she used to, leaning slightly on a cane, came Mrs. Danladi herself. Grace stood in her doorway, wiping her hands on her wrapper, watching them approach with the particular calm of a woman who has already survived the worst thing they could do to her. Grace. Michael's voice was different now, softer, humbler, though whether from genuine change or simple necessity, she couldn't yet tell. Can we talk? She didn't invite them inside. She brought out 3 plastic chairs and set them in the small yard, and stood rather than sat herself, arms crossed. Say wetin you wan say, she said. Mrs. Danladi, lowering herself carefully into a chair, would not meet Grace's eyes at first. It was the woman Grace didn't recognize who spoke, the lawyer, it turned out, a barrister Susan Bailey, calm and professional, laying out the situation. Chief Edward Danladi had died without updating his will in over a decade, and under the terms of that will, his estate was to be divided among all legitimate and acknowledged grandchildren. A dispute had arisen between Michael and his two sisters over the distribution, and in the course of legal proceedings, the question of any unacknowledged children had become impossible to avoid, especially once Patience, the same house help whose gossip had once exposed Grace, had mentioned the pregnancy to a family friend, who mentioned it to the lawyers. If Faith is proven, through DNA testing, to be Michael's biological daughter, Barrister Bailey explained, she would be entitled to a share of the estate as a grandchild of the deceased. This is not optional, under the will's language, and frankly, madam, it would not be wise for the family to contest it once paternity is confirmed. Grace listened to all of this in silence. Then she turned to Mrs. Dunlady. You remember the day you slapped me for that parlor? She asked quietly. You remember wetting you tell me. You say, make I carry my bell comot. Say if I ever come back, you go destroy my mama's name for village. You throw away money for ground, make I bend down, carry am like beggar. Mrs. Dunlady's jaw tightened, but for the first time in either of their lives, it was Grace who held the power in the room, and both women knew it. I was wrong, Mrs. Dunlady said finally, the words clearly costing her something enormous. I was a mother protecting her son's name, and I did it in a way that was not right. Not right. Grace almost laughed. You call your grandchild bastard. You call me a shawl. For 7 years, nobody from this family sent even 1 naira, one message, nothing. Now, because your husband died and money day involved, suddenly you remember say I get one daughter. Grace, please. Michael leaned forward, his hands clasped. I know I failed you. I know it. I was young, and I was afraid of my parents, and I chose the coward's way. I've thought about her, more than you know. I'm not proud of the man I was. You dey talk true now, because lawyer dey your side, or because your heart change? Grace asked. Because those two things no be the same thing. He had no good answer for that, and to his credit, he didn't pretend to. Faith, drawn by the unfamiliar car and voices, appeared at the edge of the yard, school bag still on her shoulder, looking between her mother and the strangers, with sharp, curious eyes, Michael's eyes, Grace realized with a jolt, the same shape, the same intensity. The yard went quiet. Michael stood slowly, staring at his daughter for the first time in his life. Faith, Grace said carefully, go inside small. I go come meet you. But the girl didn't move immediately. She looked at Michael with the frank assessment of a 12-year-old who had spent her whole life being told a story about a father who wasn't there, now confronted with the actual man. Are you my father? She asked him directly. Michael's composure, so carefully held together through the lawyer's explanations and his mother's stiff apology, finally cracked. Yes, he said, his voice unsteady. Yes, I am. I'm so sorry it's taken this long. The paternity test, conducted 2 weeks later at a private clinic in Garki, confirmed what Grace had never doubted. What followed was months of legal wrangling, family meetings, and slow, uncomfortable negotiations, not just about inheritance, but about what kind of relationship, if any, could exist between a girl who had grown up fending for herself and a family that had once thrown her mother out like refuse. Grace did not make it easy for them, and she felt no obligation to. She hired her own lawyer, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who had grown up in circumstances not unlike Grace's own, and took the case, in her words, because I've seen too many Graces in my life, and not enough Faiths getting what's owed them. Together they ensured that Faith's inheritance was placed in a trust that Grace controlled until her daughter turned 18, protected from any future attempt by the Dunladi family to reclaim or diminish it. Mrs. Dunladi, in the months that followed, made repeated attempts at reconciliation, invitations to Sunday lunch, gifts sent to the house that Grace mostly declined, stiff phone calls that always seemed to circle back, eventually, to some version of an apology that never quite arrived whole. Grace accepted none of it as absolution, but she did, cautiously, allow Faith to decide for herself what relationship she wanted with her father's family, a decision Grace felt her daughter had earned the right to make, even if Grace herself never fully forgave the people who'd made it. Michael tried harder than his mother. He showed up for Faith's school events, awkward and overdressed among the other parents, learning slowly how to be present in a way he'd never had to learn before. He never asked Grace to forgive him, which she noted, quietly, was perhaps the first genuinely wise thing he'd ever done where she was concerned. "I'm not doing this to make up for it," he told her once, sitting stiffly in her small parlor while Faith changed out of her school uniform in the next room. "I know I can't make up for it. I'm doing it because she's my daughter, and I've already lost 7 years I can't get back." Grace studied him for a long moment. "At least now you dey talk sense," she said. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't nothing either. Faith was 17 when she gained admission to study law at the University of Abuja. The inheritance money from her grandfather's estate, carefully managed, wisely invested by Grace and Sarah over the years, more than enough to cover not just her tuition, but a small flat near campus and a healthy cushion left over. Grace herself, using her own portion of the settlement she'd fought hard to secure for her daughter's upbringing, had finally opened the small provisions shop she'd dreamed of for years, Faith & Co., she'd named it, over her daughter's mild embarrassment and obvious pride. On the day Faith left for university, Grace stood in the doorway of their compound, no longer the single room with shared bathroom, but a modest 2-bedroom flat they'd moved into 3 years earlier, watching her daughter load boxes into Michael's car, the two of them bickering good-naturedly about how many books one person actually needed. Mrs. Dunladi had sent a graduation gift, a gold bracelet, accompanied by a card with more warmth than Grace had ever heard from the woman's mouth. Grace hadn't quite decided what to do with either the warmth or the woman who'd finally found it, 7 years and 1 funeral too late. But she let Faith keep the bracelet, because some grudges belonged only to the person who'd earned them, and Grace had decided long ago that her daughter's future would not be shackled to her mother's old wounds, however justified those wounds remained. "You good?" Michael asked her, as Faith climbed into the passenger seat, waving. "I dey," Grace said, and for the first time in a very long time, she realized she actually was. She had built a life out of the wreckage they'd tried to bury her under, not because anyone had helped her, not because the Dunladis had ever truly reckoned with what they'd done, but because she had refused, on that Sunday afternoon 17 years ago, to bend down and pick up the money they'd thrown at her feet. She had walked out with nothing but her dignity. It had turned out, in the end, to be enough.